Henry Ford, okay, had a guy. Henry Ford it's in the book Alchemy. There was a guy he had brought in some consultants, and they said, "You seem to run an efficient business, Mr. Ford, but there's a guy down there who you seem to pay like $50,000 a year, some immense fortune at the time, and all he does is sit, he sit in his office with his feet on the desk." And Henry Ford replies, "That's absolutely true. But 2 years ago, he had an idea that saved me $3 million. And when he had that idea, his feet were exactly where they are now."
Welcome back to the Quest for Questions podcast for the part 2 of the mind-bending conversation with Rory Sutherland, the luminary of the world of advertising and problem solving. If you missed part 1, we journeyed through a labyrinth of why fame concentrates the satisficer's way of travel and promoting countries for tourism. It's a must listen, like a first half of a football match that you don't want to miss the highlights of. Today we are diving back to explore the delicate balance between exploitation and exploration, the secret sauce behind top salespeople, and the enigma of compensating innovation. Think of it as a second course of a gourmet meal where the flavors get even more complex. Our key questions for this round are: how do organizations bridge the gap between exploiters and explorers? What's the secret sauce behind top performing salespeople? And how do you properly compensate for groundbreaking ideas? This is Konrad Yerba Mateatic, and we are about to kick off the second part of the conversation with the one and only Rory Sutherland. Buckle up.
What is the potential for a greater and richer form of human interaction when you don't have to actually travel to meet someone, and where incidentally, by the way, it's irrelevantly, okay, you can have slightly more speculative meetings because the opportunity cost is lower. So when I agree to meet you, okay, now first of all, I love you and all that, but I'm not going to fly out to a remote part of Argentina to meet you.
I know.
If I went to Ogilvy's travel department and said, "There's this Polish guy, right?" And I was just thinking, if you could get together on the flight, they're going to say, "What the hell are you talking about?" Now, I don't need anybody's permission to hold this meeting, okay? It's partly in working time, but I can just go ahead and do it because it costs zero. Okay, that's the first one. Secondly, I'm not that bothered about saying yes to the meeting because how do I cancel the meeting? Okay, right? Okay, I would have felt a bit bad about it, and you would have gone, "Oh, that's a bit of a bummer." Okay, but it wouldn't have been a big deal. We would have rescheduled it for 2 days later. What the heck? If you were traveling to see me, even if you were traveling from, say, Leeds to London to see me, and I cancel the meeting, that's a serious, I feel like a total arsehole, and you're actually really angry. Okay, now that's important because every time you arrange a physical meeting, there's a degree of commitment or non-optionality to that meeting. Okay, which is actually problematic. What do I do now? You've agreed to fly over from Argentina to meet me in London, and I'm supposed to be working on a pitch. That's a bit of a dilemma, right?
It's true. No,
But actually, in Zoom world, the number of serendipitous encounters outside your workplace, people always say, "Oh, you miss people must be in the office for the value of serendipitous encounters." I agree with that. No one, I think, is suggesting that it's all remote all the time, okay?
Yeah.
But equally, there must be a value. It's rather like, quite often, and I said the other value of working from home is that, which nobody actually clocks, is that it gets people out of the open plan office. And the open plan office is kind of a catastrophe, I think, in many ways. I don't think you can do deep work, and I don't think you can do social work. So, what's the point? Okay, it's neither sociability nor is it solitude. And the working environment, the hybrid working you want, is actually 3 days of solitude and 2 days in the pub. With your colleagues, that would be actually pretty much optimal from the point of view of productivity. Okay, it isn't 5 days, whatever it is. It's a barbell, as the seat talent would call it. It's two extremes. Now, what the open plan office seeks to do is to solve for the average, and it ends up solving for nothing.
Same with 5 days of work, right? 5 days of work, a weekend, it's also sort of like this. Instead of, for example, working for, 3 weeks, all days, and then having like 3 weeks off.
No one really researched the productivity of the open plan office. The reason was the finance department liked it because it saved money. Okay. And the HR department liked it because you no longer had arguments over who got an office and who got a bigger office and who got a smaller office. So it kind of just made a load of decisions really easy. I think most of the research on open plan offices is actually highly negative. There's certainly evidence that shows that people email people in close proximity to themselves in an open plan office much more often than they do in other settings. Okay. But that's not a bad measure of when things aren't as productive as they should be. And there's nothing, so quite often,
Yeah.
well, you've got to think of the solution. Okay. And then you think of the solution and you realize there are other benefits to the solution which haven't been counted in. Now, just to give an example, having studied network theory a bit and complexity, I'm a very big devotee. I think Britain should have an open access locker network for e-commerce delivery and returns to remove road congestion, too many vans. It's simply too expensive delivering to 25 million households rather than 25,000 locations. Okay. There are lots and lots of reasons where you can make the case for this locker system of delivery and returns. Most people, most days, travel from where they live to a place of slightly greater population density. In the UK, you probably only need 20,000 lockers to cover the whole, maybe part of the north of Scotland and a few remote areas of Wales. But 20,000
the boxes are popular now. You know, the boxes, the impost.
Impost, exactly.
It's from Poland.
The Dutch are apparently planning some network where every locker is basically within walking distance of your own home. With the population density of the Netherlands is very, very high. But then I suddenly realized, hold on. There's another thing you can do with a locker network, which you can't do with a domestic delivery. You can deliver at 3 o'clock in the morning. You can deliver at 11 o'clock at night. Now, you can't do that in a residential area, right? I mean, either the recipient goes insane or else, okay? Or else your neighbors go insane, okay? Because there's a bloody van pulling up at 3 in the morning. They think they're going to be burgled. Now, if the locker's at a gas station, that can happen anytime you like.
No, it became huge popular because I even now, when I had the choice to get a courier, I would always, and most of my friends and people live in Poland, I choose this because you can go anytime you like. I think you have now like 24 hours or 48, but then you can prolong it by 1 day. And it's perfect, to be honest. And I think it's this great, basically, I heard the sentence, innovation is basically engineering around a seemingly apparent either or choice, sort of like this dual thinking to the both end, like that Roger Martin talks about, right? That I think a lot of times we are
Roger Martin fan, because I think Roger Martin is the best writer and thinker in business and marketing I've come across. Well, since like recent drought, I did Jerry Bullmore would come close as well. But I completely venerate. Well, I met Roger Martin in Cannes, actually. I completely venerate the guy. He's absolutely fantastic. And he writes exactly about this kind of thing, which is that design thinking is the creative resolution of things that lesser people think are contradictory. Okay?
Or a trade-off, right? Like a trade-off thinking versus the economics.
Nicholas Gruen, who's an Australian economist, thinks that the introduction of the concept of the trade-off to economics has had enormous costs because economists just look for trade-offs and assume things are either or, and there's a kind of optimization problem somewhere in the middle. Okay. Now the creative person would say, what if this isn't a trade-off? You know, the classic thing is Cunard. Okay. Right. Planes are fast. Okay. Ships are slow. Okay. What we've got to do is make the journey part of the holiday. So Cunard effectively was a liner company which invented the cruise industry. I mean, that's a gross oversimplification, but more or less, that's how it happened. Okay, and so if we actually assume that travel time is not a disutility, then actually we don't have a problem being slower than the plane. It's obviously going to be a niche market, but you still get to survive. Now, remember, before air travel, what did transatlantic liners do? They completed for the Blue Ribbon, which was how fast you could cross the Atlantic. Okay? So before the aircraft, the jet aircraft, came along, cruise ships competed on speed.
Yeah,
There
you
was
said
one
about
British
like
Italian one which had some sort of anti-seasickness mechanism, which I thought was really clever. But for the most part, they competed on speed.
no, I think you said one this example too about like where is the best place to sell luxury cars. And you said it's at the actually at the
Yeah,
coast.
when people are selling yachts and aircraft, yeah,
Yeah, because like the comparison, right?
there's a real difference up there behind you.
Yeah. In Catamarca, they are like crazy. If you saw, look, woo!
Good drink, good drink, yeah.
Lemons and oranges.
Just
It's
fall off the trees are fantastic. Yeah.
no, it's crazy. It's winter and it's it's the middle of winter and all the August now, it was like 30, 35 degrees.
So how hot is it there in the summer?
Ooh, hot, 40.
Right. Interesting. Yeah.
But
That's
it's
fascinating.
it's windy too, very windy. It's like almost all year wind and very dry. I was just wanted to kind of run by you some of the things. For example, no, one was about obvious atoms. I read this book. It's actually
Yes.
really,
Robert
I listened
Algebra,
to this.
fantastic book. Yeah.
Yeah, this is, I think I would recommend it to more people about it. It's like it's an audiobook, even like 40 minutes or something.
It's
It's very
40
quick.
minutes as an audiobook. It's literally a sort of 30, 20-minute read if you read it as a book. When I became a creative director at Ogilvy, the boss of Europe at the time, a guy called Mike Walsh, gave me a copy of the book. And I was kind of a bit affected because he actually collected kind of Edwardian era and older, mostly children's books. But I kind of thought, why have you bought me this kind of hokey self-help guide? Shouldn't you have bought me like a subscription to Harvard Business Review or McKinsey Quarterly, And I was slightly peeved, I admit. And then I left the book on the shelf, and then I picked it up and took it to the lavatory a month later. And it was a life-changing read. I mean, it was absolutely brilliant.
But what
Just
did
this
you
point
take
that
away from
actually,
it?
wow. And the long form version of Obvious Adams, I would argue, is the film The Big Short, which is everybody else had a theory and an assumption. And these people actually went and, rather than using the data they had, they went and looked. Okay. They went down to they went down to that huge conference in Las Vegas and realized the people were basically assholes. Gillian Tett did something similar. She's an anthropologist who wrote a fantastic book called The Silo Effect. Nassim Taleb spotted that the statistics they were using were fundamentally erroneous, that there was far too much based on the Gaussian distribution in terms of risk profiling. And then the people at The Big Short basically then went and talked to strippers in Miami who told them they owned 8 houses, or 6 condos and a house. And they realized this whole thing has become entirely detached from its mooring, that it's basically a catastrophe waiting to happen.
It's connected, I think, to this principle, from the war. I studied the art of war and things that we
Yeah.
wrote like a small book for Amazon with my ex-mentor on marketing. And it was, the map is not the territory, right? That this is one of the boots on the ground that you have to like go and see. So
He's
that's your
Polish,
main.
actually. The guy who said that's actually Polish, isn't he? Kobzinski. Am I right?
Cool.
The guy who said the map is not territory is actually a Polish American, I think, called Alfred.
Oh, really?
Korzyn. It's something like Kobzinski or something like that.
I didn't know that.
He was a Polish sort of thinker and very, very interesting guy because there's an example I discovered, which is lovely about the map not being the territory, okay, which is that when you model for something and worse still, become very attached to your model, okay, even tiny differences between the model and reality can prove decisive in a complex system, okay? And the story I discovered about that was that when they did the raid on the compound of Osama bin Laden, okay, now these guys, right, are Navy SEALs, okay? They plan for everything, okay? They rehearse everything. They practice everything. I wouldn't have done that. I would have just pitched up at the door and see what happens. But that's why I've never been headhunted to become a Navy SEAL for that. And many other reasons. Okay. They don't play, these guys do not play it by ear. So they built a complete replica of the compound somewhere in the woods in Western Virginia. And they rehearsed basically the raid like time after time after time before they actually did the raid. And then on the day of the actual raid itself, okay, the helicopter crashes. Now, why did that happen? Turns out that when they built the model of the Bin Laden compound in Abbottabad, okay, they didn't bother recreating the wall around the outside. They just built a chain link fence. And when a helicopter lands next to a chain link fence, it's like landing on a field. It's absolutely fine. All the kind of downdraft escapes, just as it would if there were no fence there at all. Okay. In reality, the Bin Laden compound had a wall on a chain link fence, and you get some weird vortex effect. If you get a radio controlled helicopter, right, you try and land it in a cardboard box. It comes down, 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 it descends perfectly fine. And then as soon as it hits the top of the box, it starts going batshit crazy because the effective vortices created around the helicopter base. Now, I'm sure the helicopter pilot knew about this effect, but the fact was when they rehearsed the landing, the actual model had one tiny missing component, okay, which seems irrelevant when you're designing the model, but then turns out to be decisive when you actually impose the model on reality. And I think that's very common. And what created is people who have unbelievable. I wonder if it's actually a problem with higher education. It's a problem with the expansion of higher education. I don't know. People are more attached to the kind of sanctity of their model than they are concerned by deviations from the model in reality. And they'll almost do everything to shoehorn reality into their preordained model of the world. And if, and you see how much, an example would be, okay, and what happens is when you get a concentration of like-minded thinkers at the top, these effects actually don't get cancelled out. We all had a discussion about the Chinese economy. But one of the things that you can say about the Chinese economy is that it shows that the Politburo in China is absurdly overdominated by engineering graduates. Because it's a kind of infrastructure first. Now, don't get me wrong. In some ways, infrastructure first is a great thing to do. You have this crazy statistic now, like, okay, this is a much, much poorer country than the United States in terms of median income, average income, and everything else. There are whole swathes of China away from the centers and the eastern coast, which are effectively, shanty towns. People living in caves, okay? And yet, like 98 of the 100 tallest bridges in the world are now in China, not the United States. I know there are a few in France and so forth. Now, you notice that Indians don't build cities that are unpopulated or uninhabited. They don't build railways that aren't granted, okay, right? It's a kind of organic approach, and it's, Indian culture is gloriously kind of non-homogeneous, It's gloriously kind of dissenting and diverse, okay? Now, what you notice is that when you put a bunch of experts together, what they want to do is demonstrate their expertise to each other. And a consequence of that is that they become less and less creative, because if you want to demonstrate your expertise as an engineer, the only mechanisms that gain you status as an engineer are engineering ideas. Okay. If you went in as an engineer and you talked about the Uber map, and you said, now very good engineers would know this. Really smart engineers would go, no, actually, it doesn't really matter whether you wait 5 minutes or 15 minutes for a car. It's a non-linear relationship. What matters is that you're not left in a state of uncertainty, right? But a hell of a lot of people will go, no, we must have a predictive algorithm which sends cars out to areas where we anticipate high demand. And that might work. It might not be a totally stupid thing to do, okay? It might achieve efficiency gains. Yeah, I buy all that, okay? But it's equally something you can only do when you're a really, really big cab company, okay? And it's equally something which is catastrophic if you get it wrong. Because if you send them taxi drivers into the middle of nowhere because you think there's a rave but there isn't, they're not going to thank you. Okay.
Right. The website Edge Org,
It's
they,
very
they
well.
had
Yeah,
this.
yeah.
And once I remember I wrote your answer there about this. There was this one year when they did like, what is the most underrated scientific theory or scientific
Yeah.
idea, something there were. And you wrote, interestingly, that in your opinion, the most underrated is the theory of sexual selection, actually. Not that everyone knows evolution, but most people are not really aware of that much of sexual selection, how crucial it is. And I've been
Well,
reading.
I think in a way it was Darwin's bigger idea because we would have got to natural selection eventually anyway. Okay. That's the first point. Probably required advances in geology, really, so people would revise timescales. Okay. But we would have got there anyway. Whereas sexual selection is a bigger leap. Explaining the peacock's tail is a bigger leap, I think, in terms of the imagination, or rather, it's a more unlikely idea in many ways. It's one of those ideas which never occurred to you, but then becomes absolutely self-evident once you've heard it. Obviously, it is necessary in nature to communicate things. Once animals have evolved motion and smell and vision, then one of the best approaches to survival is to influence their behavior. Okay. And
So you still think this is the most underrated, like, scientific idea?
maybe I just thought it was interesting because everybody goes blah, 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 natural selection. But there are probably 20 people who have a vague grasp of kind of, standard evolution for every person who has a grasp of what you might call sexual selection and, feedback loops and things like that.
I think the sexual, like for me, why it became so when I started reading and thinking about it more, and Matt Ridley, now the Red Queen effect. You probably know Matt Ridley's book, the Red Queen.
Fantastic thing. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
because I think that this like whole framework applies really well to the world of marketing, because like one of the key, for example, principles is that for a signal to be honest, it has to be costly. I think that's like basically a lot of marketing, right? Like, like we want to make it efficient, but if we make it efficient, most of the time it doesn't work. And then there comes the surprise, which we're talking about. And
one of the things that business will have to get its head around is the fact that if you want to grow, growth involves some degree of inefficiency. Okay. Because selling to new people, customers will always be a bit less efficient than selling to old ones. Okay. Getting someone to shift from Airbnb to a hotel room is going to be more difficult than getting someone to shift from the Hilton to the DoubleTree. But since Hilton and DoubleTree are both owned by the same hotel, the value of gaining a new customer is much greater, even though the behavioral change resulting is less efficient. Okay. And so one of the things we'll have to stop doing if we want to have another 50 years of interesting economic progress, not necessarily growth, but development, innovation, and progress. I don't think, by the way, economic growth is necessarily entails growth in the volume of consumption of raw materials or the production of carbon. There are lots.
Oh, you said it once. That's the problem with capitalism. You said that it lowers the cost, but then it becomes in a mind less valuable. So that's like a huge problem with.
Yeah. I mean, I read the most extraordinary thing once. One of my arguments, and my father is the first person to have suggested this, is my father always thought that property in the UK in the 1970s and probably the early 80s, but throughout the 60s, 70s, and early 80s was too cheap. His theory was that the reason property was cheap was that there were a huge number of people who did not own or needed to buy televisions, washing machines, dishwashers, foreign holidays, cars. And those things were enormously expensive. And part of the reason for insane expansion, it's partly low interest rates. It's partly a psychological factor that people spend as much on property as they can afford because they assume it's going to go up in value. That there's going to be a multiplier effect on their borrowing. But it's partly the fact that actually we don't compete on status much in terms of it. I mean, there are Londoners who have, the car was a major status symbol. Okay.
Yeah.
I can remember when chest freezers and tumble dryers were a conversation piece. You'd invite people in to see your tumble dryer. Okay. Admittedly, that was 1972. Nonetheless, I can remember. Okay. All those things, thanks to free market capitalism, economies of scale, division of labor, etc., became cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, which left them effectively no longer as status goods. They were kind of, you have Bosch, Miele, you have all those things, which to a degree are status goods. But I mean, if you look at how expensive those things were in the 1950s and 60s, it was astronomical, And so there is a question that you make something abundant and you deprive it of some of its meaning and value as a consequence of that. I mean, what happens, by the way, because there are these factory made or these artificially made diamonds now. Okay. They can basically make diamonds, right? Well, what happens? Okay. I don't know. Do you get people who just have, like massive jewelry? I mean, or maybe this is good for the environment, by the way, but anyway, let's park it. Do we just not think diamonds are special anymore because they've lost their meaning? If you can go into Claire's accessories and buy something that looks like the fucking Koh-i-Noor, right?
I've heard that the women are still asking for the real thing.
In the Middle Ages, if you held a wedding for your daughter or whatever, and you wanted to show off, you had a lot of pepper on the table. And no, massive, you get a pile of pepper. Be like, whoa, is this a special occasion? There's pepper. Okay? Completely weird.
So there's something interesting in Argentina, and that got me thinking about how ideas spread. That's still a bit like mystery to me. Maybe you probably are more steeped in this, but there's an example of this really famous beverage in Argentina, like the cocktail. It's called Fernet con Coca. It's from Fernet Branca.
Fernet and Coke.
Yeah. And it's super fascinating for me. I tried talking to Argentinians. How did it become a national beverage when in the whole world, like no one drinks it? Italians don't drink it. Everyone thinks it's horrible. And Argentinians are like, everyone drinks it now with Coke, and it's like the national drink. And it's like incredible. And it's spread from Cordoba, where I was living.
So the ethnic population of Argentina is actually Italian, not Spanish. Okay.
More Italian than Spanish, yeah.
Peculiarly, during the Falklands War, Spain sort of supported Britain, although they were a bit iffy because of Gibraltar. The Italians remain neutral, and the British said it's perfectly acceptable for the Italians to remain neutral because the ethnic population of Argentina is possibly, 80% or something Italian. I mean, it's very, very heavily Italian anyway. It's certainly
lower, but yeah, a lot.
So Fernet, if I'm right, is imported from Italy. Is that right? I mean, they probably make it locally.
No, how it started, it's originally Italian because Fernet Branca, the most famous here brand, is Italian. And they first, imported it and no one was drinking it. Now they produce it here and there are many brands. Still, the Fernet Branca, the Italian one is most famous. They have a factory here. But for me, it's like fascinating how something like this can spread that suddenly.
It's brilliant to study because you get another one, which is absolutely fascinating, which is Jägermeister. Okay.
Yeah. Jaeger in Poland. Very much.
It's in Austria. I think it's Austrian. It's a liqueur and it was kind of drunk by, elderly people. Okay. And for reasons which must have been a total surprise, I have no idea how it happened, but I will research it for my next book. The American, the Jaeger bomb, the American kind of student crowd, it's on the Jägermeister.
In Poland too.
And Poland, so the Jaeger bomb is a big thing.
Yeah, it's big. It's big. You have, because they always have
There's a fascinating thing which happened, which is that someone very, very clever working for Nestle in Japan simply noticed, and this is where I say this is like marketing is like detective work. It isn't like give me all the data, average it out, wait for the answer to come out. It's not a kind of Gaussian average solve for the average and you solve for the whole. It's not like that. Okay. It's like detective work where you go, that there's a dog that didn't bark in the night. That's strange. How come this band did this rather than that? Okay. You look, it's a bit like poker playing. You look for the tell. Okay.
The outlier.
The very short guy, Nestle in Japan, just noticed that it might have been Hokkaido, or it might have been another island, but one of the smaller islands of Japan. Okay. One time of year, sales of Kit Kat went off the charts. Kit Kat, the chocolate bar. It was a pretty niche product in Japan, I think, but the sales were absolutely crazy. One place, one time. And it turned out that in the local Japanese dialect, but also I think in mainstream Japanese, but particularly the local dialect, Kit Kat sounded like good luck. And what was happening was that people, when they sent their children off to the exams at school, they gave them a Kit Kat as a good luck gesture, and as something you eat if their sugar levels dropped, I guess, during the exam. And from this whole extraordinary kind of edifice was built in the same way that in Japan, and I'm not making this up, okay, because of one advertising campaign some years ago, the Japanese go to KFC on Christmas Day. You have to pre-order your meal, okay? And I'm a big fan of KFC, but, well, I'm sure for Christmas Day, we're a lot easier planning, but I think my wife would be fairly short shrift if I said, well, this Christmas, do we go to your mother's or no, we're going to KFC? I think my wife would take issue with that, but you get these extraordinary things which are just kind of runaway signaling effects, runaway coincidences. And it's kind of, it's kind of a butterfly effect in a sense where, something very small and weirdly tangential, okay, suddenly can drive an extraordinary kind of trend.
Yeah, I think it always starts small. I mean, the story, for example, for Fernet, the one I read or heard is that at the stadiums of Cordova, at the end of the matches, like people were, getting drunk, and they would run out of alcohol, and people wanted more, and the only thing left was the Fernet Branca no one liked. So I think some bartenders mixed it with Coke because it was horrible. So like mix it with Coke, that's pretty good. Everyone loves, and the only thing that's there. And I guess, people started liking it, and somehow it spread over all Argentina. And now, like, I think the Fernet, like, Argentina has like 90% of sales.
That's right. Yeah, I think 90% of their sales are Argentine. There's also the weird thing which Rick Rubin talked to me about, which is that when he produced Walk This Way, he was interested in rap, but thought that rap was too far away from music to actually break through. So he combined it with a song, okay, as a kind of gateway drug into rap. Because it's kind of like a stepping stone. And you might say Fernet is too far away, okay? That concept in design, maximally advanced yet acceptable. In other words, in order to innovate, the thing you innovate with has to be comprehensible and recognizable to humans. Otherwise, it's simply too unfamiliar to get their heads around, even though it might be superior to innovate to a greater level. There's a famous example of Raymond Loewy producing a fan that was completely silent. And because it was completely silent, no one believed it was cooling them down. Okay, this fan's shit. Because some part of our perception of a fan had learned to think that an effective fan is a bit noisy. A fan completely silent. People just undervalued it as a fan. So that's when Loewy got the whole concept of maximally advanced yet acceptable. And probably Fernet is too far. French too far. Fernet plus Coke, okay? Then what you've done is you've built a kind of behavioral stepping stone, effectively, to the acceptability of something. And presumably, I don't know, maybe people drink Fernet with a few other things now. I don't know. But there's a really interesting
what did you
theory
say?
around this, which is that the human brain, you mentioned it just before I went to the loo. There's a book by Andy Clark called The Experience Machine, where he posits and to some extent revives a theory which a few other people had in the 19th century, like Helmholtz and I think William James, okay, which is the brain is principally a prediction engine and it uses perception to detect and minimize prediction error, not as a source of raw data. So it's similar to the process in data compression in JPEG photography. You don't describe every pixel in aching detail. Instead, you describe how pixel 2 is either the same as pixel 1, in which case you need very little data, or how it differs from what you might expect pixel 2 or pixel 3 to be. And you can remove a huge amount of data that's needed simply by using the incoming data to revise expectations rather than to generate a whole model of the world. So it seems like a model of the world, our expectations are built on internally and then kind of revised when we encounter surprise.
And I say that marketing is a perception hacking, actually.
Possibly explains the hostility to creativity in a way, in that if the brain is a prediction error minimization machine, and this apparently, now I'm basically too stupid to understand this, but I think it has kind of echoes of Carl Friston's free energy principle, that you minimize free energy in some way. That there's a kind of law of kind of quantum physics, okay, where, complex systems basically tend to minimize. Don't ask me to explain that because I read it and that blood starts coming out of my ears. The guy is patent a genius, but I'm not. I can tell he's a genius without fully understanding what he's going on. Okay, but there's something really interesting there because in other words, there's a limit to how much you can tinker with people's assumptions and expectations without discomforting them. But on the other hand, young people, in order to learn, probably deliberately expose themselves to surprises. There's a kind of the one argument against that theory is, look, if we're a prediction error minimization machine, then surely all we'll do is stay inside and stare at a wall and eat the same food every day and go and have a poo at the same time every day. And we won't actually experience any surprises. But in evolutionary terms, we need to calibrate our perception by surprising ourselves. Okay. Yeah. Because there's a cost to not surprising yourself, which is that your model of the world becomes ludicrously oversimplified.
That's the explore exploit, right? And
exactly, yeah. There's basically an explore exploit trade-off. Well, that's why creative people are annoying, because we've created this silly bifurcation, which is instead of everybody being 20% creative and 80% exploit, we've got a world where there are a load of people who have exploit jobs, like accountants, and a load of people who have creative jobs, like me. Okay, we're going to end up annoying each other. Actually, I think the best application for creativity is actually to teach people who are 5% creative to be 20% creative. Maybe the best thing I can do is not actually to go and be creative myself. I'm only one person. I'm not brilliant. But, I've practiced that and I've been in an environment which encourages it. No. But equally, the reason I'm good at it is partly because I work in advertising, which is an unusual milieu in that surprising answers are encouraged rather than penalized. And there aren't very many working environments where that pertains, actually. Okay. Comedy, yes. Okay. There's creative advertising. There are about, these 10 places, possibly, higher reaches of the law. I don't know. Right. I don't know. Actually, probably in bloody physics at the, very top level of physics or, whatever, okay.
Richard Feynman.
There's one little Niels Bohr quote where he says, you're not really thinking, you're merely being logical. Okay. Which is a really important kind of insight. But the reason I find this easy to do is because I'm not shit at it. I'll acknowledge that, okay, and I have a natural propensity to look for kind of Python-esque or oblique solutions to problems. But it's also because I've been lucky enough to be in an environment where you don't. It's one of very few environments where you can say something stupid and still get promoted if the stupid thing is sufficiently interesting or challenging. So what we've done is we've created this world which has exploit jobs like finance and McKinsey and optimization, whatever. And then we have this business with these people who are explore people. Now, bees had personalities. The random bees would despise the kind of obedient bees, and the obedient bees would see the random bees as complete dilettantes and they ought to be eradicated. Nature has found this kind of balance between the two in terms of explore and exploit. In terms of animal foraging, it's found the balance within the individual animal. Okay, bees have found that balance. Actually, I don't know, because I don't know whether the bees who go off random are different bees, or whether that's 20% of bee journeys just have to be a bit random. I need to, I can't tell bees apart, but I need a bee expert to answer that question for me. But if we could find that balance within individuals, okay, and the best review I had for alchemy was in the Wall Street Journal, and it was a software coder guy, right? And he said, what I love about this book, it was his recommended holiday reading, is that it teaches me I've got a second toolkit I can play. I can play with the logical, reductionist, efficiency-minded toolkit, or I can play with the psychological, complex, perceptual, phenomenological kind of toolkit. And they're both valid. Just, okay, there's a kind of trade-off between when you want to be exploiting and when you want to be exploring. If you can actually create that world where instead of having 200,000 creative people and 800,000 accountants, okay, you actually had, everybody being a kind of creative accountant, I think that would be the best outcome, actually.
Yeah, because that ties to, there is actually a Roger Martin's article, my favorite of his is about the explore exploit trade-off. And he has a line that really resonates with my experience of like trying to, work and have my business as sort of like something of doing marketing, email marketing, copywriting. That's what I've been doing. That the explore people, like basically the gist of it, that he said that basically the exploit people can take, when the explore person stumbles upon something and it's very, can be long term, you don't have like predictable rewards. The exploit person can take advantage of that really sort of easily, but it doesn't work the other way around. It's like if you are the explore person, you don't really get the benefit
So
as the
people have
exploit.
to report to rational people. Rational people never report to creative people. Okay. And secondly, the burden of proof for a creative idea is 20 times higher than the burden of proof for a random idea. Okay.
No, but I mean that the most, for example, also most money, and that's why I was connected to a question, like how do you actually, for example, make money from ideas, is that the money is not in the exploration. Actually, the money is usually in the exploitation. And I've struggled in myself that I always explore.
The real money and the big money, the upside, the surface area exposure to upside optionality, and the resilience, the real money shot, to use the language of pornography, okay, is where the random bee shares his discovery with the exploit bee. That's where where you really cash in. Now, I think there are lots of people within organizations who have brilliant creative insights. Salesmen, right? I think that in most B2B companies, the best 10 salesmen they employ have basically hacked into a brilliant approach for selling the product. It's a reframing, it's a dramatization, it's something psychological and cunning. But salesmen don't share, right? Because your reward, remuneration, and status as a salesman is relative to other salesmen. It's not relative to the overall performance of the company. Now, in bee evolution has a kind of social selection mechanism there, where hives where the random bees kept stum, okay, would go extinct. Okay? But I think there's a fundamental problem, which is if you look at the explore exploit trade-off, okay, I think there's a fundamental problem, which is that if that feedback loop, in other words, there are two things that are critical, that the obedient bees are content to fund the random bees, and the random bees are content to share with the obedient bees. And if you don't close that loop, the entire system breaks down.
How would you do it, for example, as far as compensation? Let's say you work as you probably work sometimes as a like consultant, things like how do you get compensated properly for your ideas? You know, like, is there some kind of
Well,
advice you have for people, like if they are
yes,
not inside a big organization?
Henry Ford, okay, had a guy. Henry Ford, it's in the book Alchemy. There was a guy he had brought in some consultants, and they said, "You seem to run an efficient business, Mister Ford, but there's a guy down there who you seem to pay like $50,000 a year, some immense fortune at the time, and all he does is sit, he sits in his office with his feet on the desk." And Henry Ford replies, "That's
Ah,
absolutely
yeah.
true. But 2 years ago, he had an idea that saved me $3 million. And when he had that idea, his feet were exactly where they are now." Okay. Now, you can't incentivize that guy on his daily productivity
Mm.
because explore doesn't work like, okay?
Yeah.
Now, it gets difficult. For the pharmaceutical industry, the majority of people who work in pharmaceutical research spend their entire lives never working on any drug that makes it to market. That's difficult, okay? But they accept the fact that this is just the price you pay. Hollywood accepts the fact that you have, a load of clunker films, and they're all funded by the surprise blockbuster at some level, okay? Actually, it's probably the Weinsteins who actually cracked an alternative way of doing it. But, you know, the, but as I said, they're not really in the game anymore for obvious reasons. But they did crack an interesting business idea with kind of higher quality films that were surprisingly popular. That was a kind of discovery in a way. And I can't honestly say I miss them, but surely as a film goer, I kind of do. Okay. I can't say they're missed, but surely as a cinema goer, there is a missing kind of component to cinema at the moment.
Mm.
I'm not interested in comic book characters. I'm 57. I go to the cinema about once every 6 months. And the last thing I saw was Oppenheimer, right? That's the kind of, problem, I think. And there's a whole missing audience of cinema goers since that particular formula basically got canned.
Mm.
I think you can recognize and reward it. The two things you've got to be careful of are one, the time scale, and two, quite often those people succeed in a way that wasn't planned in advance. Okay. So in other words, they quite often deliver not what you are looking for, but something altogether different. Penicillin. Okay. Right. No one was looking for penicillin. Fleming noticed it. Okay. Now, if you're to adequately incentivize and remunerate, explore activities, you have to have a longer time frame. I mean, explorers can be clever because they can look for quick wins, and they can, and if you're a good explorer, I think you can find a few quick wins. It's not the best fucking patch of pollen, but you bastards never looked there, did you? Right? I think you can play the game a little bit cleverly by having a few quick wins. But
Yeah.
also, you need to be very open-minded about your definition of value, because with the exploit bees, value is defined in advance. Okay. It's basically energy out, energy retrieved. Okay. It's a formula. That's what you do. If you're not doing that, you're not doing your job. But the exploit bees, will occasionally deliver value from a basically previous unanticipated source. And there's always a danger in remuneration that people go, that doesn't count. It wasn't what you're planning to do. So the fact that it's valuable is discounted. Okay. You are only deemed to be valuable to the extent that you obtain objectives which were
Mm.
defined in advance. Now, I'll give you an example. Okay. I'm the vice chairman of Ogilvy. I think it is uncontentious to say that a hell of a lot of people apply to Ogilvy because they've heard of me. Okay. Right.
Yeah. That's
Now
true.
that is actually
Sure.
very valid. Right. it's very valuable that we get very good people applying to work with us, and we get, interesting, diverse in every sense employees coming and wanting to work at home. Okay. But there are two problems with it. One, it wasn't what I was asked to do. Okay. And two, it's hard to quantify. Actually, okay, I would say if you're a business person of any kind, okay, the one of the two or three most valuable things you can do in your entire working life is hire someone good. Okay.
Hire someone who?
Someone who's better than you. David Ogilvy's advice. Okay.
Ah,
If I go and find someone and, I go and find I wouldn't name them, but once or twice when I was a creative director, I don't know if I was a brilliant creative director, but I did manage to hire 4 really great people who in many respects made better creative directors than I did. Okay. That's a real game changer. No one knows how to reward it. Okay. Right. What do? You say, okay, well, first of all, the value of what I've done only emerges when the person's worked for us for 5 years. Okay. By which time it's too late to say, that guy that you really rate, well, it was thanks to me I hired him back in 2018. Okay. And secondly, it's impossible to quantify that value anyway. Very easy to quantify what the exploit bees are doing. That's a simple mathematical formula, which is go with weights of bob, basically, and distance travel. Okay. It's a simple optimization problem where all the quantification questions are known. The explore bit is totally different. Okay. In fact, of course, you don't know whether, you don't know the value of a discovery when you first make it. That only becomes apparent in retrospect.
I heard that there was this really famous mathematician. What was it called? He has a really beautiful book and speech on YouTube. He worked on the communication of Bell Labs, on the Bell Labs laboratory. I don't remember. He had one principle about working on the importance of working on the most challenging problem if you really want to go like far in life. Like he was saying in his example of how he got far in mathematics, but he was giving examples of in general. So I'm thinking if it's really key to work on the most interesting or most challenging problem, like I'm wondering, you probably are involved in many, like what are some of the ones that you are working on right now? And maybe
marketing problems are often very, very challenging because you have these two forces raged against you every time, which are habit and social copy.
Mm.
So, now it's interesting that the Fernie Branca thing started a football stadium. Okay. It would be much, much harder to create a trend out of Fernie Branca in a bar. A single bar probably doesn't have the volume of sales to reach critical mass with a new drinks combination. Which stadium was it? Was it Newell's Old Boys, River Plate?
No, it was Córdoba, in the Córdoba. I don't remember which.
Chaleres, is that right? No, hold on, no, that won't be right. Oh, Chaleres, Córdoba. Yeah, that's it. Okay.
Talleres, sí, Talleres is the biggest club of Córdoba.
Talleres, of course it is. Yeah.
They were like second, I think, now in the league here. But it's very Cordobés. Like when you talk to Argentinians, they say like a Fernet con Coca is like very Cordobés, like this province and the city. But they drink it everywhere.
Yeah.
No, but I was asking basically about like, because my idea, we're talking basically going back to principles that expert is someone that knows more and more about less and less. And it's usually not the experts who innovate, like who are able to solve the most difficult challenges. So I was thinking in an ideal world that if you wanted to solve like really challenging, important problems in the world, you would actually want to like gather people from different fields that would somehow
One, we call this sometimes in the behavioral science practice, we call this lateral category analysis, which is it's basically has someone already solved your problem? They've just solved it who are different than me. So we've had this ULEZ problem in London. They introduced this massive tax on older diesel cars going into the city. Now, I would argue the problem they didn't address is what about people who have an old diesel car who can't sell it and have to travel into the city 200 times a year? You cannot charge those people £3,000 a year because it'll bankrupt them. Now, where has that problem been solved elsewhere? Well, it's called the railway season ticket, because you recognize that if people make a journey very frequently, you don't charge them as much as if they make the journey only occasionally.
Mm.
Okay? Because you wouldn't really have any commuters unless they were a discount for commuting your ticket. In the same way, I think there's also a thing called beginner's mind, which Rick Rubin talks about, which is kind of Buddhist concept, I think, which is that people who come to something completely fresh don't have the assumptions, to quote Akoff, okay, Russell Akoff, they don't have the baggage
The wise
someone
fool.
has if they've worked in a field for years and years and years. They just
You know,
haven't
the
come
wise
to fresh through the virtue of ignorance. You know,
No, have you heard about the concept of the wise fool that was always in mythology and some Asian stuff? Like basically a wise person, but a fool in a way that approaches a problem with an ignorance. Even someone said, I think it was Peter Drucker who said that he approached all his like engagements with his ignorance, not his expertise. Rory, just wanted to paint a picture a bit of like the future. I know you have the for the closing thoughts of like, I know you were running this Math Fest, right? So can you give
also a Mad Masters program, which is an online training course. If you Google Mad Masters, you'll also find my training course online, which is currently offered through the same people who organize Mad Fest, which is the sort of partner organization to Nutshell.
What's the idea behind it? Why did you start it and go for it? It's about teaching creativity, or or is it more for marketing people, or more
particularly marketers, but salespeople, people in any field of life, effectively, that marketing, to quote or misquote Rick Rubin, is a way of being. Okay, it's a way of seeing the world. It's complementary to the way other people see the world, just as, presumably people, the exploratory bees look at the world in a way that's different to the obedient bees who are just obey, waggle, dance, repeat. It requires a fundamentally different mindset, and it's useful for people, not all the time necessarily. In fact, to do it all the time, unless you work in advertising or comedy or one of those fields, to do it all the time would be a very bad career move. But to be able to do it when the situation requires it, that's really critical.
And can you give like a sneak peek about I know you don't want to give too much of it, but about your book you are writing, the book that's coming. When is it coming? What is it about? Like, what's the idea behind the new book?
It's, do you want to win arguments or do you want to solve problems? That's the essence part of the book. And it may or may not be called Stop Making Sense.
Any possible release dates for now, or?
I've got to submit it December 24. So my guess would be it would appear at the early part of 2025.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of the Quest for Questions podcast. If your immediate reaction after listening to this episode is either, fuck, that's some great advice, can't wait for more, where do I sign up? Or, man, I had the same idea in mind, but I assumed it's just me being weird. Thank you for sharing. Or, this bastard hurt my feelings, offended my delicate soul, and should be banned from the internet. Then it means we're on the right track, doing God's work. In that case, make sure to subscribe, review, or do whatever else is allowed by technology to support this show. If you want to suggest a quest or have a question worthy of a quest, head to ConradYerba.com. Go down the rabbit hole of truth each and every Sunday. Available on most podcasting platforms, YouTube, and Pirate Bay. Wink, wink. Let Yerba be with you.